I joined HarperCollins Publishers, after which I was at Penguin Random House India, where I got the chance to publish a lot of wonderful authors.
Everyone wants to be part of Penguin and Harper. It's like a dream job. They are the one who controls all of publishing in Scandinavia.
In the modern terms, an author is an extremely creative person who is also an excellent salesperson. Few people have actually transcended that level, like J.K. Rowling, for example, who is a billionaire, or Stephen King, who I would think is extremely rich and wealthy.
The thought is more of like, how do we make it into a full-time profession as an author? And that I think is extremely hard. What would you tell someone who wants to, today he has a, or she has an idea of publishing a book? What would be like a few things that you think is absolutely needed for them to get it to all the way to the end? This is part of Dreamer series, where we delve deep into human psychology to make sense of people. Today's guest is Shreya, a publishing expert who has over 28,000 followers online. Feel free to watch her story till the end. And as you do it, don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot to me. Maybe we should start by introducing you, Shreya. So, who are you?
Who am I? That's an interesting question. My name's Shreya. I live in New Delhi. I was raised in a typical Indian household where we traveled a lot across the country because my father was in the Air Force. And professionally, I did my engineering, post which I decided that I didn't want to join a corporate TCS like or Infosys like place. So I decided to become a journalist with the intention of later working as a book editor. And that's exactly what I did. So I joined Mint, which is a part of Hindustan Times.
Okay.
Post which I joined HarperCollins Publishers, after which I was at Penguin Random House India, where I got the chance to publish a lot of wonderful authors and work with some of the best teams ever. And that's been my journey. Now I run this Instagram handle called The Editor Recommends, which I started while I was at Penguin, just because I wanted to help new authors understand the industry a little bit more. Since it's slightly not slightly, actually, it's highly gate kept, and the information on the internet that's available does not always apply to the Indian scene. So that was my intention. And now, thankfully, we have a genuinely lovely community. So that's what I do. And now I work primarily as a consultant because last year I got burnt out and I was diagnosed with depression also. So overcame that, and that's who I am and where I'm at.
Okay. Maybe we can like start by like every other interview where we're going to talk about the very first memory in your life, and then we're going to build a thread from there to where you are right now. So do you remember your first memory in life?
I think I do. The very first memory I have is of taking a walk with my grandfather, my Dadaji. We used to, in the evening, walk around the neighborhood there in Chandigarh, which is where I was born. And it used to be a lovely little walk because he would point at things to me and say, that's a tree, that's a building, that's a house, that's a school, that's a church. And I got fixated on this word. If I'm not wrong, I think it was tank, like a water tank. So yeah, then I used to call everything tank. And that was kind of fun. So I very distinctly remember that because it's often been brought up as well about my obsession with that particular word.
And what age were you at this time?
I think I must have been 3.5, 4. Before that, I don't remember anything.
Okay, and you were in where exactly where was this happening?
This is in Chandigarh, which is a union territory north of New Delhi, the capital of India.
Okay.
About 260 kilometers north of New Delhi.
And who was around you at that time?
I had my grandparents, my parents, that was it. My father was posted at Chandigarh during this time, which is when I was born, and it was fantastic.
And what were your father, mom, and possible grandparents, what were they doing at their in their life?
My father was working in the squadron.
Mm.
Is a technical officer, so he was responsible for maintaining the aircrafts,
Mm.
and that's where he used to be primarily at. My grandparents were both at home. My grandfather had retired by the time I was born. My grandmother was anyway a homemaker, so that's
Mm.
that. And at that point, I think my mother was working in a school. She's a teacher. I mean, she
Mm.
was a teacher for 20 years, and
Okay.
she used to go for her job as well.
Okay. And what about your? Do you have any siblings?
I do have a sibling. I have a younger brother. He's 7 years junior to me. He wasn't born at this point.
Okay. How was your childhood? Do you have any memories from your childhood?
I have very vivid memories of my childhood ever since my brain started storing memories. My childhood was mostly fun. I
Mm.
was an extremely introverted kid, and thankfully, my parents let me be that way. They didn't force me into sports or other activities, which I clearly did not enjoy. I was extremely studious. I used to have my nose buried in a book, or I would be playing with my toys, imaginary games, and such. I almost always only had like one or two friends in whichever station we were posted at.
Mm.
That childhood was mostly all about um, getting into minor trouble, getting scolded, studying a lot, and enjoying the fact that my parents mostly, yeah, they left me pretty independent, and I really
Mm.
appreciate them for that. Yeah,
And how was it like always moving? Since your father was in the Indian government, you said like you've been moving around.
yeah,
How was that kind of
it
situation?
was tough. It was very tough. I mean, in hindsight, it taught me a lot because now I can fit into any situation, any geography very easily. But at that point, a posting almost always meant changing schools and uprooting your entire life to form new friends. And
Mm.
since I was, one of those front bencher students, uh,
Mm.
it would be a challenge to then go and impress a whole new set of teachers and to establish my dominance as a class
Mm.
topper. So like having to
Mhm.
prove myself repeatedly made me highly competitive,
Mm.
and that part was fairly tough.
Mm. Yeah, I can see like most of my friends who have army, navy, air force parents, they have very high level of adapting to new
Yeah.
situations because they have always been moving all their life. They have been to like many schools, met so many different kind of people, different languages, culture. So they always adapt quite fast. So
Yeah.
um,
That's for sure. Like we moved from the westernmost tip of India, which is Nalia. It's
mm.
really tiny, very tiny town. I would say like not more than 40 kilometer squares to Bangalore. And my school in Bangalore was a convent school, and they did not teach Hindi back then.
Mm.
This was 1999, so I had to learn Kannada for almost 2 years.
Mm.
And our house staff at that point, who were native Kannada speakers, would teach me so that I could do
Mm.
well in school. And finally, I think at the 1.5 year mark is when they hired a Hindi teacher.
Mm.
So just me and one more girl, we would walk all the way to this other building in the school where a separate Hindi class was done, and I could not read or write Hindi well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, assume an age you are at right now. So you've been moving around quite a bit. You have formed kind of an identity of someone who likes to study. How was, say, middle school or high school for you?
It
What
was
were some memories back in that time? What do you remember?
middle school and high school were the best. I mean, the best time of my life. I was finally in a school where, so we were posted to Delhi. The first year was very tough because I was coming from, again, a very small town. And I remember when we came to Delhi, my father's elder brother, he said to me that Delhi will change you. And I just scoffed at it, saying, what does the city have to offer? It had a lot to offer. And for the first time, I was confronted with the vastness that comes with a place.
Mm.
and the different types of culture all under one roof. And just the fact that distances were like 40 kilometers.
Mm.
So I used to get sick in the bus. I would vomit when I would reach school. I get car sickness. And that used to be horrible. But then once I settled in and I developed that groove, we moved on to class six, which is middle school. So that
Mm.
was new for the entire class. So I wasn't the only one who had to prove to the teachers that I was smart. And that felt good. I was in that school for almost 4 years.
Mm.
Best time of my life. Really good friendships formed, some to this day. Very good memories made. And I could really blossom because the teachers were fantastic and it was very, very nice.
And what was your point of view of the world at this point in life? Did you have like how did you think generally about the world, the people around you?
My knowledge about the world and my opinion of it has always been shaped by books.
Mm.
So I remember that my librarian figured out pretty quickly that I was a voracious reader. So she would recommend books beyond my reading level. So, for example, I began reading Jane Austen in class seven. She made me read all of Charles Dickens' books, and she would nudge me into picking up different kinds of fiction. So, for example, she introduced me to Guy de Maupassant's stories.
Mm.
Um, so that's how my worldview was built. And for me, at this point, I was very clear about a few things that I don't want to date in high school because boys are trash.
Mhm.
I was an atheist by this point. In class six, I had declared to my parents that I don't believe in God
Mm.
and everything we do is a consequence of our actions. And they were pretty supportive of it. They said, fine, as long as you can pretend in bigger gatherings that you do believe in God, we're good with it. Um, I was also a raging feminist back then.
Mm.
Now I'm slightly more mellow. And my worldview honestly has not changed a lot since then because you become very accepting of lots of different cultures just by the sheer exposure you get to so many different places in your own
Mm.
country. And India that way is so diverse. B, because you're reading so much, nothing in life comes as a shock because you've
Mhm.
already understood the fact that even 100 years ago, these same emotions kept playing on repeat, and that we as a species have not quite evolved.
Mhm.
And that was very comforting that whatever I'm going through has been gone through by millions who have come before me. And of course, there was a lot of teenage angst because one did tend to be misunderstood.
Mm.
And that those fights obviously happen with parents. But even then, I loved the fact that in our house, a fight was taken very seriously. It was almost like a debate. So
Mm.
you had to come prepared with your logical
Arguments.
reasoning. Yes, exactly. And emotions were encouraged. So
Mm.
if you wanted to cry, you were given a safe space to cry. And if you wanted to like bang the door and walk out, that wasn't encouraged. But if you did that, it was accepted.
Understood.
So
Yeah. Mm.
yeah, so all of that was like pretty fun.
I think it's like a very healthy childhood in a way that you can put it out, like what you feel. Because I can see like there is a lot of young parents having children and they have a hard time regulating their emotions. And then the children kind of shows their emotion and it gets very complicated. And then they have
Yeah.
to bottle it up and then they become an adult. They have serious trauma, problems related to childhood and growing up. I was going to say that since you read a lot ever since you were young, a lot of philosophy and ideology from around the world finds you, and then it shapes you. For example, the way you are thinking about God, because a lot of people they don't think a lot because they don't have the exposure to other philosophies and thoughts of other people, so they kind of accept like it has always been like this. People around me act in this way. Let's go with this. This is like what is there to think about? So reading
So
does
true.
help people to like expand their mind and question things.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
did you want to be something specific when you were young? Was there a dream that you wanted to go with?
For sure. Ever since I knew what it was, I wanted to become a doctor. In class
Mm.
7th, I learned the word oncologist. So then I
Mhm.
changed my goal to a hyper specific one, saying I want to become an oncologist because I love the fact that you were trying to work and fight against a disease which had no cure. So yeah, so from classes 7th to 10th, I was determined to become an oncologist. And that's all I dreamt about, and that's all I cared about. So I loved science. I was very good at science. And in class 10th, though, then my dad said, you know what? You should become an engineer because it's an easier path to take. And that,
Mm.
I think, was a horrible decision bestowed upon me. And at
Mm.
that point, I couldn't quite fight him and say that no, absolutely nothing. So we made a compromise where I said that fine, I'll take science with biology, so
Mm.
math plus biology, and yeah, that was a bit more than I could chew.
Hmm. And what happened after that? So did you pursue, for example, let's imagine you are in high school right now and your parents were asking you to be an engineer and you decided to give it a try. So how did it play out? Did you
Yeah.
get my question?
No, no, no. The screen froze.
Yeah, yeah, same with me. So I was asking, like, imagine you are in the high school right now, and you have a talk with your parents, and they want you to become an engineer, and you kind of accept, like, okay, let's give it a try. How did it play out? So, How did you plan out these things? Did you prepare for entrance? How did it go?
So first of all, I didn't accept it. I was horrible about it. I I felt betrayed by the system because I had been a really good student all my life. And I was always told that I'm a very intelligent person. So I never saw a reason for them to doubt the fact that I could crack one of the most difficult competitive exams in the world, which is the Indian medical exam.
Hmm.
And that lack of apparent faith to me in my abilities, which had been hyped up for all my life, left me feeling all types of insecure and lied to.
Hmm.
So I spiraled. They've put me in coaching classes for engineering, and I actively started disliking studying
Hmm.
because in my head, since the equation didn't sit, like if you didn't believe in my abilities up until this time, where I have not, because I was never that child who changed what they wanted to become basis,
Hmm.
new words they learned. That happened only once, and then that was it. So yeah, class 11th and 12th were basically a haze for me because I had changed school once again, and I couldn't fit in well in the last school I was at because of all this turmoil. And I essentially gave up on studying.
Hmm.
I started disliking science. And once you start disliking something, you can never become really good at it. Like that didn't happen for me. So yeah, I basically just read a lot of more fiction, and I would hardly study. But
Hmm.
thankfully, right, like in class 12th, which is when you have your final board exams and you're going to graduate school and you're going to get your college, is when I pulled my socks up and did a little bit of studying. So managed to scrape through. And yeah, that was it. So then I did my engineering, and thankfully by this point, my parents again understood that what they had done was like I didn't react like a normal child would,
Hmm.
like going down thinking that, oh, I placed my trust in you. I went down fighting, and thankfully, my father then apologized and he meant it. And then he said that whatever you choose from now on in terms of your career, I trust you. So yeah.
And just before we move to the next section of life, how was engineering for you? How was studies and how was your friends back in time?
Engineering was a lot of fun because by that time, since the apology had been rendered, in my head, the balance was restored, and I loved every bit of those 4 years. I had freedom. I had never expected that level of freedom. Uh, I thankfully had really good friends back in college, and that's where I actually met my now husband. So it was a lot of fun in college. And my parents by this point had also backed off from deciding too much for me. Um, so that level of autonomy was extremely precious to me.
And how did you say that you are in this point where you're enjoying as a young person having so much freedom, and you met the person you think would be the best partner for you?
So at
Um,
that point, it was just purely like, oh, I like this guy. We weren't thinking about long-term partnership at all.
okay, and what happened after? Like, why did you choose, or did you choose to have a different path from there, or were you working as an engineer for some time?
So while still continue to love everything there is to love about science, and especially applied science, I figured in about, I think, 2 years into college that this was not the way I wanted to earn money. I didn't see in engineering that unless you were from like a super premier institute, the kind of jobs that lay after, from the little bit of research I did, I did not want that life. And so for me, it was just that, okay, I got to earn money. What are the skills I have which I can monetize? And that's how I landed on the English language. So yeah, then I told my dad that, listen, this is what I want to do. And he said, okay, good, go ahead, do
Let's
that.
do it. How did you land on your first job? What was the thinking behind it? Was there a lot of luck playing out as well? How did you feel about that?
So I don't think there is luck involved. I genuinely think if you know, actually, no, there is a bit of luck involved, yes. So yeah, I gave entrance exams for PG diplomas in mass comm and journalism. Got through one. The one I chose was actually the one which had the highest placement rate. I didn't go for prestige. I went for results. That was a smart call made there, and there I gave it my all. I was again in the prime of my, student abilities. And thankfully, they then, because I was, me and along with that, a really, really close friend of mine, we were sent for our mandatory internships to Mint. And there on the second day of the internship, we were offered a job, both of us, because both of us were weirdly enough engineers. So we were very good with data. And that's a skill a lot of creative people who have only been studying the languages and humanities don't have. They have to really work hard at it, is what was the norm back then. So yeah, our desk head was super impressed by our ability to number crunch, and he said, "Hey, I'd love to have two young reporters. Here's your offer letter. Join." And then we joined.
And how was it working for Mint? Mint, when I remember like back in time when I was moving abroad, Mint was kind of like quite popular.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of knew about Mint. It was a good brand name. So how did you think about Mint and what was the culture back in time?
Mint was really good. Like I couldn't have asked for a better stepping stone because it was a premium newspaper at a point where all broadsheets were about, I think, 1 rupee, 1.5 rupees. Mint was not a broadsheet. It was a different size. I forget what it's called. And it was priced at 6.5 rupees, if I'm not wrong. So it was a premier business newspaper associated with a lot of words that inspire, class and a certain level of intellectualism. So great brand to be associated with. I, however, was a terrible journalist because I am, even at this point in life, I was extremely introverted and I hated having to speak to random people about their opinions and views. So I knew that it was a great stepping stone, but 3 months in, I started networking with people in publishing because that's where I knew my end goal was. So yeah, I quit in like 9 months because I landed a really nice job at HarperCollins.
So I just want, before we go to Harper, I wanted to ask, like, usually when people hear journalists, they think like, oh, it's someone who goes out and interview people and then they write about the conversation they had. So what kind of journalists exist, or what would be like a typical kind of work that you should expect as a journalist?
There are different kinds of journalists actually on different kinds of beats. I was at, since this was a business newspaper, the amount of like on ground reportage was lesser. And this was a slightly different form of journalism, say from what ground reporting actually is, which is an extremely hard profession to carry out because it requires a level of commitment that very few people have.
Wow.
And that is a commitment to truth. Um, so, Mint, that way, since I was covering health for them, and health also from more of a business standpoint, it involved less ground reportage, more studying stocks and seeing who was doing well, what were the pharma companies up to, was it
Mm.
in alignment with the government policies back then, were there new policy changes coming? So it was more in office, research based, get quotes from here and there kind of work. Um, so the people who I saw were most passionate about their job was actually my senior. Her name is Vidya Krishnan. And when I saw and encountered her level of passion for covering health and the
Mm.
state of public health in India, I realized that that kind of passion is something I only have for books. So
Mm.
I was very confident then in my decision that this is not the job for me. Because the kind of journalism we now see online is fairly driven by political agenda.
Mm.
Uh, Back then, thankfully, there were still kernels of truth, and there were still people who could go out and do the actual work that journalism is supposed to do without fear for their life. Now, honestly, when I look at journalists in India who are still doing that kind of work, I am scared for them, and I can only be proud of them and support them by making donations, etc.
Yeah, yeah, I think like morality as a whole is it's becoming a harder thing to find. Like,
Yeah.
and especially people who work in journalism, it's one of the primary things they have to keep in mind because they influence people to a very high extent. Their worldview about things around how society is working. So true journalists, they are actually very much needed for people to like open their mind and view about what actually is happening. And I agree with you on political agenda and it's shaping the way narrations are created. Because I still watch a lot of news from back home because I care a lot about India and I can see like, wow, this is like even for someone who doesn't think a lot, it's still very clear how the narrations are made. But I think when you are very deeply rooted into that kind of thinking, you kind of don't see what is outside. You would like to stay and verify this is what I think and this is what the news want to talk about too. Um,
Absolutely. When journalism becomes propaganda, um, yeah, it's so dangerous. And that's what we've been living in for the last 10 years.
yeah.
So I have actively stopped following newspapers and news channels. Now I follow a very particular set of journalists, those who I know are reporting to a calling higher than other people have, because I don't see what's in it for them. Like on a very deeply capitalistic, selfish approach, I don't know what makes them get up, go out and report the horrors that exist, and do it so repeatedly without, even once flinching at the thought of going to jail and never coming out.
Yeah. And also keeping a blind side towards a lot of things that needs to come out.
Yeah.
The one way I choose news media nowadays is that I go for paid news outlets because I feel like everything that is kind of free and you can just access straight away, they need to still get funded from somewhere. And
Yeah.
advertisement model sometimes doesn't work as good, so
Yeah.
they get like bought up by people who wants to spread certain information. Whereas if you have like a premium place where you read it from, they already make money from the readers, so they don't have to get like bend their journalistic
Absolutely.
morality. But let's go back into like, so you've been working as a journalist for Mint, and then at some point you felt like books are your calling, and then
I
you moved.
already knew books were my calling, but like I said, when I met Vidya and I saw the passion she had toward what she was doing, it just reconfirmed that okay, there's no point in me trying to invest in becoming a better journalist
Hmm,
because I don't have that kind of passion in life for anything else other than books. So I just was very accepting of myself that
hmm,
I'm not going to be the one to, you know, report something groundbreaking.
hmm.
Yeah, so I decided to then start hunting for inroads into publishing.
And then you gradually moved to HarperCollins, right?
Yes.
How was life in HarperCollins? The thing before we go in, everyone wants to be part of Penguin and Harper. It's like a dream job, especially when you move abroad. And I can see like what the biggest publisher in Scandinavia. It's called Harper Nordic. So HarperCollins is extremely big outside, and they are the one who controls all of publishing in Scandinavia. So how is it working for Harper, and how is it being in that culture?
So, in India, the publishing outfits are slightly smaller because our reading population is not quite as large, especially
Mm,
English reading.
mm,
Uh, and because we have such a beautiful diversity in language, it allows for a lot of independent publishing in local languages. But like I said, Indian language, English publishing is still a smaller outfit. But HarperCollins was fantastic. I loved it. I loved it until I couldn't, and I had some of the best times there. Made some of the best friends there, and I was lucky enough for at least the first 3.5 years to be granted opportunities basis displayed skill, which
mm,
helped me, climb the corporate ladder and Tony ladder much faster than I could have anticipated.
mm,
And for that, I'm truly grateful. Like, because when you have bosses who are invested in your growth,
mm.
because they find you worth the investment, yeah, there's no better feeling than that. And
Yeah,
also, like, when you get to work with, sorry, when you get to work with authors day in, day out on very creatively driven tasks, the mundanity of emails and forms and the office work that comes with it feels so much more bearable.
mm. And I think like the screen froze a bit, so we waited to come back. Okay.
Now
So
it's fine now.
and Okay. So the other thing was like even the when you say about mundane kind of work environment, I feel like as an editor, you kind of work with very new projects all the time, right? New stories, new kind of authors, how they think. So it's an exciting job in many levels. It's not like the same kind of work you do every single day and fill in the forms and send the emails. It's a new thing and it takes shape as it goes. So how did you? So a few questions. Um, what do you think an author is? And I come from this point of view where some say they are artists, some say they have to be very good in business. So what do you think about an author? Another thing is that what do you think about books? The value of a book. How does it? How do you, from your point of view, think about overall this concept of books and authors?
Okay. So authors for me growing up were magic creators. I have always found an author as a being, uh, something which is godlike for me. And this is especially for fiction authors because they do the kind of world building uh, that, and they give the kind of insights into human minds that I genuinely think are, I don't know how they do it. It's magic. So for me, that's an author. In the modern terms, an author is an extremely creative person who is also an excellent salesperson
Mm,
because modern publishing is tough. getting the attention of a reader now is far more difficult objectively than it was ever before. And the gatekeeping in publishing has only increased. So you really have to love writing, and you really must want to connect with the kind of readers you want to connect with first, and then you better get a captive audience in some way or other, because the algorithms, they are not your friend. Publishers, they have their hands bound because they can't always dictate trends. So it's tough being an author now that it was ever before. And when I say being an author, I genuinely also mean that being a successful author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And for
I
me,
think like
books were
even in
everything.
that
Books were my
point, I feel like
friends.
success is
Books are
very
the reason
different
that
for
I am
different
the kind of
people.
person.
But generally, the thought is more of like, how do we make it into a full-time profession as an author? And that I think is extremely hard.
Yeah.
To actually consistently sell books and sustain readership, that is of a very different level of magic. Um,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for that, those are those are outliers. And that's
mm,
the thing, that if I start a startup in my garage, even if I'm from IIT, I will create the next Microsoft. That's not how it works.
mm,
So you should, there needs to be a bit of realism in your own thought.
wow.
And yeah, that that needs to happen. Most
Mm,
authors do have other professions and other ways by which they sustain their creativity.
mm,
Earlier, it was rich people giving them money.
huh.
Uh, Now it is rich companies giving them some money.
Yeah, to sustain
Yeah.
the what they
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah. Very
Um,
few people have actually transcended that level, like J.K. Rowling, for example, who is a
mm,
billionaire, or Stephen King, who I would think is extremely rich and wealthy. I don't know any other authors who you can say are that famous
mm.
worldwide. And those who are, yeah, they had a lot of things going for them.
Yeah, end of the day, I feel like you need a lot of luck on your side as well. To kind of like get to this kind of specific niches where you kind of find a voice, and also like how where the world is at this point of time, what is needed, but to calculate all that extremely hard. You
Yeah.
should be put on there at the right time at the right place for it to kind
Yeah.
of like go up. But let's come back to HarperCollins and your mentors. And I feel like one of the reasons why good people end up in the same places is because they are all driven by passion. So you had the passion for books, and everyone you're going to meet also have that kind of passion. So they are a bit more selfless. There would be certain aspects of them they want to go up, so there would be a competition, but eventually you all connect from the deeper level of passion,
Yeah.
and they could maybe see their younger self in you, so they try to really help you move up. And so how long did you stay in Harper, or
I was there for almost, I think, 4.5 years. Yeah.
okay, it froze for a minute. So you stayed 2.5 years in Harper, right?
Oh, 4.5.
4.5 years. Okay, that's quite some time. And what led you to move from Harper to a different publisher?
Uh, the circumstances of my moving were rather sad because they were not of my own choice.
Hmm.
Uh, I just was dealt a hand that I did not know how to handle. I got uh, involved in this really toxic equation with my immediate superior,
Hmm.
and I was at wit's end on how to figure it out. And I don't think there was a way for the organization to also possibly fix that equation, because this person obviously rose through the ranks and became so successful in their field due to
Hmm.
their qualities. But there was a lot of friction on both our ends. And yeah, it got to a point where I thought that this was just not worth it, and that, and I couldn't, and I'm usually very good at spotting and taking, blame, because everybody knows when they're wrong. There's that part of you which tells you, hey, listen, I think this time you were wrong. And I listen to that part very honestly, and I'm very okay with that. But every time I try to ask myself, hey, where am I going wrong here? Like, is there something undo? I could never come up with an answer that seemed satisfactory. So I quit, and I could see that their hands were tied, so they couldn't possibly do something for me, which would also align with my professional goals in the future. And I couldn't possibly stay a minute longer without losing my mind. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And I think, like with you specifically, from the way you were explaining childhood, you always have a strong sense of a person. Yeah, you would fight back if you're not comfortable, usually, because it came from a very young age. You're talking
Yeah.
about being a feminist, and also you have very strong opinion on how things should be. So it could be a clash. Usually, when strong people come into the same group, it's like fire and
Yeah.
sparks, because they want to do it in a certain way. Other person is like, this is not the right way. I think I know the right way. So it always ends up in a bit of a toxic mix.
Yeah.
Um, and where did you move to after Harper?
So after Harper, I actually took a little break, and I went on a trip with my friend for a week. It was lovely. And when I came back, I
Mm,
decided that I wanted to do a little pivot to also get a few more skills, because this is the time, this was 2019, if I'm not wrong, where the internet boom was happening. Everybody was on the internet, a lot more in India now. And opinions and fresh ideas were like only in that domain. And I knew that I didn't have a skill set which I could then transfer to a different job where I could confidently say that, hey, I know about the internet as much as I know about books.
mm,
So I decided to apply to this job, which somebody in my network was kind enough to point me toward, which was at Times Internet. And there they had this division called IDIVA, which was an online magazine catering toward women. And
mm,
I was getting a significant jump in money as well
mm,
as a great designation. Plus, I was getting a chance to manage a team.
mm,
So, the reason why I took this up was because I also wanted to understand that, again, trying to answer why did it not work out with that one particular boss, because all my bosses, all my teachers have always loved me. I respond very well to good authority.
mm,
So I thought, hey, let me try and be a manager to younger people and see if I can figure out what went wrong there.
mm,
So those were two really good drivers. I joined it. It was also a slightly less taxing job, because the commitment required in terms of the amount of inputs you were giving was highly reduced. Since
mm,
I was not writing and I was
mm.
only managing writers, I was just responsible for making sure their ideas were coming out in the best way possible, and that I was creating an environment that was conducive for creativity. So yeah, hung out with a lot of really cool young writers and figured out a lot of new skills about what works on the internet, what does not, how do you write for the internet, what is SEO, how do you track data, and what are the metrics that are important. So learned a lot, hopefully taught a lot. And again, yeah, after the end of that job, which was, by the way, a very short stint, I realized that I genuinely could have stayed at HarperCollins for like a full, like 10 more years, maybe, had that person not been there.
So before we go to the next part of your life, so for people who wants to pivot, say like I can see that in many different spots in your life, you've been moving and trying to learn new things. What should they think? For example, they might be in a toxic situation where they are not comfortable. How do we build that kind of courage to stop it and let's take a risky move and go into a different sector? what would you suggest for them?
See, pivoting in life and taking risks is a function of privilege. Honestly, it's only when you know that you have some form of backing in life. Mostly your first layer of Maslow's needs are getting met, even if you
Mm.
stop being of any monetary worth.
Mm.
That is the bedrock of being able to take quicker decisions and not accept toxicity at all. And I have had that privilege. I have always been very conscious of it. So
Mm.
I have used that as uh, the privilege genuinely that it is, that, hey, listen, I can do what so many others can't. And if
Mm.
I also don't utilize this fact that, I could stop working and my father can still, and my mother, both of them who were working, they can take care of me, and at least I can get three meals and an AC and, a comfortable life
Mm.
without too much pressure, then who else can?
Mm.
So I wouldn't feel right in saying that, hey, pivot, just believe in yourself. No. But making the right kind of pivot is important in case you are also in a place where maybe you have savings enough for, say, 6 months, and maybe you also are lucky enough to have parents who can support you for a certain duration of time. You must absolutely first think about what about the toxicity reveals something to yourself about your own, makeup and fundamentals as a
Mm.
human being. And then basis that, that's one parameter of decision making. Then the other parameter, of course, is that what is the skill that I can learn while on the job? So I'm
Mm.
still earning, but I also expand my worldview,
Mm.
and then look for jobs in that sector specifically. But that requires a level of honesty that you must have with your own self to admit that, hey, I don't know this. I would love to know this. And also be slightly good at cracking interviews where, you're radically honest and say, hey, I don't know this, but I'm a very smart person. So within a month, I'll have it figured out. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I see like some fundamental things that everyone should have. One is curiosity. The other is the ability to actually be fine with taking more work. Not as in like work, but more of like even when you're in a job, you are like, I'm going to spend some time to learn something else
Yeah.
or move around and find new knowledge. So it would be of use later. Instead
Yeah.
of complaining like, okay, I don't have any time. I'm like kind of like stuck in this place. So it also describes a certain kind of personality. Are you fine with what you have right now, or do you really want to put the effort and time into moving somewhere else and giving it a try? There is elements of privilege as well, definitely, but it's also a kind of personality trait. Uh, so,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
For
uh,
sure.
after you finished the job you were doing, what happened?
Oh, so I was perfectly fine with this life of mine. I was very happily planning my wedding at this point, and I loved my team. I loved my boss here at Times Internet. It was a, it was like I thoroughly enjoyed going to office and being around such young people, which is another like fundamental philosophy of life I have, that always make sure that you have time to connect with people younger than you, because they will teach you a lot more than the oldies can. The
Mhm.
older ones are soon to exit the mess they have created,
Hmm.
and they can only offer wisdom. And you have enough wisdom from books. Thank you very much. To know what to look forward to in the future, to be able to spot trends that are coming up,
Hmm.
you must absolutely be okay being the slightly uncool person who doesn't know shit, and
Hmm.
have the younger ones tell you that, hey, these are the things we're interested in now, because yeah, that's where all the money will go. That's how capitalism also works, right? It's for the young who will
Yes,
come into wealth.
exactly.
Yeah. So if you are snooty about what young people are doing, and if you're the kind who, when boomers used to say that, all millennials care about is avocados and coffee, well, yeah, look at the coffee industry now in India. It's insane.
Mhm.
Look at the number of cafes that sprung out of that culture. Similarly, now I
Mhm.
see lots of older people in their 40s and 50s complaining about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And I'm like, how many times do we repeat this shitty cycle before we just have a conversation with them? and see that they are just as interesting as we thought we were.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. And I think like a lot of traditional industries and services kind of fade out over time because of this lack of innovation.
yeah, and
Because there
also
is
this
all this
culture
kind
of,
of young people and trends.
yeah, sorry, continue.
Now, I was saying like there is all this kind of trends happening. For example, like people getting used to TikTok or Instagram, or people spending more time on their phone but with smaller, shorter content. I feel like traditional publishers, not just traditional publishers, traditional industries are very slow in adapting to those kind of newer trends, and that ends up them becoming quite old in the industry, and
100%.
other things kind of like move over them, and then suddenly they are like a T-Rex, like an old
Yeah.
monument of the past.
Yeah. I think, the way to look at this is to see how luxury brands work. They maintain their exclusivity and they maintain their, you know, status in society by always staying relevant in the format that their legacy allows them to be. In certain industries which are slow to move and that almost look down upon the young, you risk alienation, you risk becoming irrelevant for a long period of time that
Mm.
has actual business cost. And I genuinely think that any person who is snooty and looks down upon what the young people are doing is going nowhere in life.
Yeah, they would be
Yeah,
out because end of the day, where money moves is going to be much more relevant.
exactly.
And older generations are more conservative, so they keep the cash in the bank. They need to save. They need to be feeling secure for the future, whereas young people have the money to spend. So they kind of set the trend in most industries. So and organizations have to start thinking about it. Like I feel like one of the biggest problem in an author's life in publishing is that marketing has drastically shifted from traditional marketing, like let's put it in newspaper, let's put it in notice. It shifted so much, and people don't have still have a good feeling for it. Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's sad. The formats remain the same. It's still tastemakers.
mm,
Uh, why do we value a New York Times review more than a really good review from a very big book talker?
mm, mm,
What
mm,
makes one more qualified than the other? It's just the fact that there is a certain prestige attached to the former, which is
mm.
great. But if you keep chasing prestige, prestige does not give you money.
Yeah. Let's go back into your thread. So you went for the trip, you were enjoying the job, you were planning for main things in life, and where did you end up at after that?
So I was watching a movie,
Mm,
Ocean's 8, if I'm not wrong, with my best friend, and I received a call from an unknown number. And I
mm,
usually don't pick up calls from unknown numbers, but I picked this one up because I think I was, you're in the middle of things and you just like pick up. And it was a call from the HR at Penguin Random House India, and they said that, hey, we'd love to, we have an opening in this team. Would you be okay coming for an interview? And I said, sure. Because by this point, I felt like I would love to go back into publishing and working on books because I had more ideas on what
mm,
I could do for authors and in terms of building my own list. The offer was great. And this time, when I met my boss to be, I straight up asked her, I said, are you happy in life outside of work? Like, do you first of all have a life outside work? She said, yes, a thriving one. And then I said, are you
mm,
happy? Are you a happy person? And she said, yes, I am. She just had the most adorable baby. And
mhm,
I got such good vibes from her because when she walked in, some people have that aura where they know their place in the world and they are secure in it. So they don't
mm,
feel threatened by a sudden blip in someone's talent or a
mm,
sudden downturn in their own, I don't know, perception by other people. She just walked like that. And when she was open to answering these questions and having a really honest chat about what kind of a boss she is, I said, yes, please sign me up. I would love to work with you.
Mm. And then you ended up in Penguin, another biggest publisher around the world.
Yes.
It's crazy that you work both in Harper and Penguin, because again, like those are the places to be if you want to work anything with books. I mean, there are
I
other
would
big.
disagree. Yes, I would disagree. I would say that in India, there are lots of my peers who have worked
Mm,
both at Harper and Penguin because the maximum poaching
mm,
happens from these two. It's quite literally like it's like Russia, USA, India, Pakistan. Um, yeah, we love. It's a very small industry, so there is a lot of attrition between these
moving
two.
around.
Yeah, so it's not. I think it's easier to do this in India than it is outside, where the competition is a lot more fiercer.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of books did you work in Penguin? What kind of books was coming in? I wanted to talk to you about the whole process, because it would be
Sure.
like really, really good for people to understand how a manuscripts come in. How do people come in contact with this kind of close community of people who kind of decide what have to be a book? So could you explain a little bit on that?
So this task of deciding which book is a book we are publishing and which is not is the role of primarily a commissioning editor. And in commissioning, it works two ways. We get inbound requests from agents or from authors who've reached out independently. The other kind of commissioning is where you have an idea of what you want to publish, and then you find a person who you know will sell. So I think about 85% to 90% of my list has always been me approaching people to write a certain kind of book, and then both of us, the author and I, collaborating on the idea to make it the best possible book they are capable of writing. And early on in my career at Harper only, I decided to work on nonfiction because anything you do for a job becomes boring. So I
Mm,
wanted to retain the sanctity of my relationship with fiction. So I chose
mm,
nonfiction. Plus, it meant that I would get useless trivia on so many different things,
mm,
right from medical malpractice to the 2G scam that happened in India to all of that. So that was a really good decision. And in Penguin, I continue to build on that work, which is identifying trendsetters
mm,
who could also, whose professions lent themselves to write good books that would sell.
mm,
So we all commissioning editors have a revenue target, and they either meet it through acquiring books presented by agents or
mm.
by acquiring books that they themselves go and figure out with the author. So that's how it works. And the
Oh.
process is not that of the editor alone, because once you finalize the idea, it's a team effort. You first present it to your immediate team of editors in that particular division, post which it then goes to the sales and marketing teams also, where it's essentially sales who decide what format and what price and what print quantity will the company be willing to take on for this particular author.
Mm,
And the editor's responsibility here is to make sure that they're representing the idea in the best possible way.
mm,
And they're basically really good salespeople in terms of, pitching the book to the larger organization.
mm,
Because
mm.
the editor's enthusiasm for a particular idea really determines the feelings people who are
Future.
listening to. Yeah, exactly. So that's how the
Yes.
process works. Yeah.
It's very, very like what I hear a lot from the way you explain is about risk management from their
Yes.
side. How do
Yes.
you risk manage? How do you really find the best bets from a
Yes.
group which they are confident about? So you could write an extremely unique book, but that might not have a market, which
Yeah.
ends up not being accepted. So you need to also
Absolutely.
understand what sells.
So I don't think it's the author's responsibility to write to what is selling. That would be incorrect. It is the publisher's responsibility to safeguard their bets in a manner where, just
Mm,
like any stock portfolio, you have some low risk, high gains,
mm,
some high risk, volatile stocks, And it's only when you have an amalgamation of that do you get the best possible returns. If you're playing it too safe, you will always have a flat line in terms of the ROI you're getting. If you play too volatile, you will never make money because, things could crash at any point with any of the companies you're invested in. So it's the same with authors, to be honest. So which is why publishers tend to go for those 5 really big names, like, media personalities, celebrities, now influencers and content creators. And that money then helps the publisher take a lot more risk with authors whose books have niche audiences.
I understand. And I also feel like when people work in Harper or Penguin or any publisher, they need to also have the sense of making good decisions consistently, or at least try to make good decisions consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
the reportage around publishing has always been very skewed toward the fact that woe be me, like, oh, only celebrities sell. That's not true. If that was the case, then only celebrities would get published. But
mhm,
while there is a certain, like, there are publishers now, for example, Fitzcarraldo, uh, who does really, I mean, they're just a team of, I think, 9 people, and the kind of books they are bringing out consistently are absolutely amazing. They take the
mm,
kind of risks a bigger publisher might not be able to,
mm,
because they also have bosses sitting on top of them. These are all companies funded by
mm,
bigger companies. So the bigger you grow, obviously, the slower you have to move.
mm.
So there is, of course, that risk for an
And
author.
what would be your opinion on the reputation of a publisher? For example, like um, at least from outside, you would think like, okay, even if you talk about something very controversial, I say like political propaganda, you write a book about that, right? Um, what would you say? How would a publisher think about this kind of topics? Do they want to play it safe, or would they be like, okay, let's go for because it aligns more towards the truth. Um,
It it really depends. If you're talking specifically about India, uh, I would say risky publishing has become a lot more expensive
mhm,
because we have now, in the last 10 years, become a very litigation happy country where
mm,
freedom of speech is not appreciated at all. So it quite literally depends on a lot of factors because it's not a single person's decision. So some very controversial books have been turned down
mm,
because it it would just not, I mean, either they're not making that big of a point, which makes it okay to fight a long case, judicial battle in India.
mm,
Or, yeah, sometimes the publisher just wants to play safe. Maybe they've not made any profit in that quarter, and they're like, okay, just the number of defamation suits we're going to get for this would amount in lakhs of rupees in judicial problems. So, yeah, let's let this one go.
mm. Okay,
But
let's.
most publishers are uh, there is definitely a saffron wave in India, even in terms of publishing,
Mm,
because books published by certain people affiliated to certain parties are doing a lot better.
because they work in a community thinking, so
Yeah.
there would be more support. Makes sense. Like from a business point of view, it makes sense. Like end of the day, you still need to make money to sustain. So why not? So what happened after Penguin? So what was the decision for you to like stop working for Penguin and move to the next step in life?
So at Penguin, things were going really well. I loved my team. I loved my job. But it that thing in me again started where I was like, oh, it seems like I have done everything there was to do in terms of the learning that the job had to provide.
Hmm.
Because the editorial role remains pretty much the same, whether you commission 5 books or 500.
Hmm.
So I was feeling a bit stagnated, and I felt that, oh, I would love to like explore a bit more as to what else is out there. And by this point, I had started the editor recommends, and I had started making money off of workshops I was doing. I was more in touch with people from the tech side than some of my peers were. And tech has always excited me, whether it was the internet or just like apps.
No.
And, you know, so I was approached by this startup called Pocket FM, which is an audio based uh, audio platform for, well, originally they were only for books, but now they do a host of other things. I liked the sound of it. I did my research on them, and it seemed like at that point, they were a CDC funded startup. So they were flush with cash. The founders seemed really good. The role was really good. Plus, of course, they got more money. Um, so keeping all these factors in mind, I just thought, hey, since I've learned everything I had to learn objectively, and because the next promotion was guaranteed, so you're like, okay, now this is going to be as stable as it gets. And I don't particularly value stability as much as I value, like, experiencing new things. So yeah, when the Pocket FM thing happened, I gave two really like long tough interviews, and I was selected, and I got an offer letter, and I quit, and I joined them.
And how was it like a shift from publishing and you're going to tech heavy still book kind of sector, right? And I would say startups might be a bit more fast moving because they
Yeah.
are trying to really expand in a short time, burning more cash to get more audience. How was it working over there?
I feel like while my team was great at Pocket FM and I could have learned so much there, it was too much for me. Not the pace of it, because pace is great. I'm very young. That does not daunt me. It was just that I felt ill-equipped to understand how to grow the business and contribute to it. And I don't like not knowing things to a degree where it's impeding my job. Like, yes, learn on the job, but sometimes there is just too much to learn. And it then feels like you're wasting their time by constantly having to ask questions and be that one idiot who doesn't know anything. So I've definitely felt that. I felt that I was ill-equipped to handle the job because the job had also, by the time I entered the organization and spent 2 weeks, had changed. So my original role was no longer just that. And I was still supposed to be in touch with traditional publishing, which moves so slowly that I was feeling that pace gap.
Didn't match.
And yeah, it wasn't matching. And then here, when they pivoted my role a little bit, I could see that I did not understand what CAC is, what ROAS is. I didn't know how the algorithm works in terms of ad spends. So if I was being asked for judgment calls, I had no data to base them off of because I am primarily like a trend spotting connections person. So this heavy data analysis and decision making, I felt I needed to go back and like study before I could come and contribute in a positive way. So yeah, that stint lasted only 3 months because I do not like feeling useless at all. And yeah, I had a fairly nice exit from there because they also understood I was like a fish out of water. And they were like, okay, fine. Maybe once you've learned these things, you can come back. But hasta la vista.
And then what happened after that? So you worked for 3 months. Then what did you decide?
I got COVID for the first time. This was 2023. So went through that shit. Thankfully, it was the mildest version of COVID. So we went through that, recovered. Then I had like a 2.5 week long honeymoon planned in July. Went for that, came back. While I was coming back, I got a call from one of my senior colleagues at Penguin saying that she was leaving for a very prestigious fellowship to Yale, and she wanted somebody to essentially fill her position, like, just manage her authors for about 6 months. So I thought, okay, while I figure out what I want to do next, let me go back and do a job which I can do in my sleep. And yeah, so I just rejoined Penguin for about 7 months on a contractual basis to figure out how I could go and learn the skills that I definitely want to learn, but didn't know where to begin.
And how was it going back to Penguin at that time?
Oh, lovely. It was absolutely fine. So we had left on very good terms. And this particular, like I said, senior colleague of mine, she is so great at managing things that the role didn't feel like I had to, it was very comforting actually. And the people in publishing generally are like absolutely lovely. So it was just like going back home and being comfortable and being served a very warm cup of tea with the side of scone. And I just felt like, okay, thank God. Okay, this stuff I know I am very good at. Let me keep doing this to earn money. In the meantime, let me figure out how do I ace this data set thingy properly.
And you've been doing all this on the side. You've been still working hard on the editor recommends, right?
I
You're
wouldn't say
still having.
working hard. I am the most inconsistent poster. Anybody who's been following me on that account, I was at the first 10,000 followers, are very aware that she is not a reliable content creator. Like, you cannot follow me and expect lots of content. I am very moody, and I am also very uncomfortable in front of the camera in a way that, like, I don't know what can I say that could be easily consumed as a fun reel. So, yeah, that's a challenge I'm still trying to overcome by posting more consistently to figure out what sticks.
Yeah, but I have seen some of your content. I think it's great. You give
Thank
very
you.
authentic, open suggestions and tips on things. What is the future for you? For example, like let's think about like now we have moved to Penguin. You stayed there, and you've been also working as an influencer and trying to build a brand. So, what are some of the thoughts behind what could be a good place to move to?
So I did. I actually did this course called Rotex. I was a
Hmm.
part of their cohort, and there I learned everything there is to learn about, making money in a startup
Hmm.
as a growth person. So whether it's so now, like I feel like now if I went back to a tech startup, I would be really good at it because I came first in this course,
Hmm.
and I think I did brilliantly.
Hmm.
I was very, very good. And now that that skill gap has been filled, I did take up a job again at a startup as a marketing head.
Hmm.
And I don't know, there's some problem that I faced with female bosses, barring the one who was the loveliest to me. This job was, I think, 1 week in, and I knew that I could not stand it.
Hmm.
I hated the way the company was charting out its next moves. I
Hmm.
found lack of knowledge and lack of transparency and ethics.
Hmm.
So yeah, I just was like, okay, I'm gonna get through 1 month, take the salary, and go. And again, it felt horrible because I felt as if my internal radar and checks and balance system to make right decisions was shaken, because now this was the second time this was happening.
Hmm.
And my family was like, listen, your LinkedIn is going to look like you are a schizophrenic person. And I felt the same way. I was like, should I just try and, like, get through 1 year of this?
Hmm.
And then my husband, who is, God bless him, the most clear headed person in my life, he said, why would you waste a prime year of your life on a job you hate, with something you don't at all believe in because of the way it was being done? So once he said that, I said, fine, makes sense. So yeah, I quit. And that quitting, though, yeah, in all honesty, was completely and entirely, it was just, I had to get out of there. I could not, I don't see great things happening for that company in the future if
Hmm.
they continue working the way they were at that point. Because after that, subsequently, like, whomsoever I've spoken to about that place has had only negative things to say about it. And I thought to myself, I wish I had this information earlier,
Hmm.
because at that point, I was also riding that high of having killed in a course which is considered really tough, and then getting a job just after. So it was a really neat narrative arc. And to break the story your brain is building around your own greatness is very hard. So I just had to accept I made a wrong decision. And yeah, take
And I think like with startups, especially if they don't have a clear, sometimes they don't have a clear plan. So they have to cut some loose corners to make sure they survive. And
yeah,
it comes with its own price in time.
yeah.
But it's quite typical to expect from a startup. Um, so I understand. And so I have to say, now you've been moving, pivoting multiple times over the time.
Yeah.
And then what happened after you quit from that place? What was your thinking? What did you want to do next?
I took a sabbatical actually. I completely disappeared off the internet. I was diagnosed with burnout. I was diagnosed with depression. And I after I quit that job, I genuinely, like I said, my internal balances seemed completely off. I started doubting my decision making abilities, and I thought it was best I removed myself
Mm.
from this zone of decision making and just enjoy just being. So I went to my therapist and I told her that I couldn't think anymore. And we worked on those issues, figured out that I was absolutely spent mentally
Mm.
and that I was exhibiting an alarming sign of like, brain distress.
Mm.
So, on top of this, my grandmother at that point, my nanny, my mom's mom, she had been diagnosed and she was battling cancer, leukemia stage 5. Uh, so, we knew that that death was impending. And as soon as I quit this horrible job, my grandfather passed away, and I was very, very close to him. So, grandfather had just died. The grandmother was about to, in a few months, no matter how much blood transfusion was given and how much chemo was being done, it was just not, her body couldn't take it. So, with that in mind, I just felt it was best that I take a break and take an actual break for myself and
Mm.
nothing. So, I did nothing.
Yeah, I think like sometimes it's a lot of things happening at the same time, and it's quite hard.
Yeah.
And everyone needs to understand. I feel like they need to take some time off. Like there is no rush. In my opinion, the rush is coming from your own mind. Like, oh my God, I'm missing this
Absolutely.
time. I need to push, push, push. But life is very long. So if you cannot continue like always pushing all the time, sometimes you need to take proper rest and rejuvenate a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
and
That's what I did. And again, I had the privilege to do it because I don't think a lot of people can take a long break because they have either dependence or debt or they're just not economically in a sound position at that point in time. So I had none of those concerns because it's just me and my partner. It's just the two of us, and of course we have a dog, but he doesn't cost all that much. Just having the faith that once your brain heals, it can again become a machine for minting money. You should have that faith in yourself that it will not begin to rust. It will
mm,
just begin to heal. So that faith was paramount. And it becomes hard, in India where the first question everybody asks is, so what are you doing these days? And
mhm.
to become okay to say that I'm just taking a break. I'm on a break. And now I say it very proudly. Like now I'm, yeah, I'm like, it's so sad that you can't take a break.
Mm,
So that change happened fairly quickly once I realized that the answer to life's problems is quite honestly generational wealth.
yes.
So now I go to my parents and say, why didn't you work harder when you were young?
Yeah, and I feel like everyone who asks genuinely, they inside at some level they want to take a little bit of rest too.
Yes.
But it's just that some people are more equipped, like you were explaining, to take a bit of time off. I don't think the problem is that they look at you and say like, "Oh, why is she taking a break?" It's more of like they feel like, "Wow, she's actually taking break, but I cannot."
Oh,
So,
actually, you'd be surprised to know that lots of people were in the former category where they were like, why is she taking a break? Like, why break? Who takes a break at 31? And that I felt a lot of that. Like, hey, how can you let your Instagram just die? And are you sure you don't want a job? We can get you a job. And all of that
mm,
happened. And to that, my response was, if I've built my Instagram once, I can do it again. My mental
mm.
health is more important. So, yeah.
Okay. And a few last questions before we end the interview. Um, so, what do you think is the future of publishing? And this is going to be like general questions where people really want to know because you are positioned in a very good way. You have the experience from the tech and also working in one of the best places you could possibly go. So, what do you think is the future of publishing? Do you think like traditional publishing, like books? What is the market in the future according to you?
I don't think much of traditional publishing will change. It's continued existing and thriving for the last 200 to 50 years. So it's not a business that's going anywhere. They are always going to be slower in pivoting, but they will pivot. And
Mm.
because I guess they are slow, their pivots will be right.
Mm.
For India, I am very, very bullish on the fact that we will reach a point in the country's economy where, as soon as the GDP rises and basic income increases, people will have more time for luxury. And that luxury, one of the first luxuries in life is having the time to read for pleasure, not for upskilling. So
Mm.
I think the future for growth of publishing in India is very, very good. I also do think in parallel that the creator economy is going to spur the fact that there will be creator led self publishing, either houses or books. And that is also a parallel industry that will continue to thrive. So,
Mm.
right now, self publishing in India is absolutely horrible. There is no lack of accountability, standards, or checks. But I feel as more and more people let go of their notion that they want to be published only by Penguin and only by, a legacy publisher or a traditional publisher, they will start expecting more quality.
Mm.
And that industry will definitely boom once that,
GDP goes up.
that,
Yeah,
yeah.
understand.
No, not just the GDP, but also
What would you
the
say?
the demand
Um,
quality
the
increases.
screen froze. So, okay.
Yeah,
Mm.
you were saying?
I was saying that what would you tell someone who wants to today he has a or she has an idea of publishing a book? What would be like a few things that you think is absolutely needed for them to get it to all the way to the end as a book in the end?
I think the first thing I would ask for them to do is genuinely, as starkly, as nakedly as possible, define their ambition. If their ambition is to become a best selling author, the path looks very different from, say, writing a beautiful book. Both things can happen,
Mm.
but if you want both things, the work increases exponentially. If you want only one of the two things, the paths are fairly simplistic. So let's assume that this person is extremely ambitious and they want to write the best possible book that sells the most number of copies because their idea is genuinely that great. I would say you need to first become a really good literary citizen, which is start reading and supporting more authors from the place you're in, which is the country you're in, perhaps. And for Indians, I urge them to read more Indian publishing, like books published in India. I would say start networking as much as possible in as organic a way as possible. Because when you only have an idea and when you haven't started working on it, you can play this game of networking for the joy of networking and meeting new people. It's not underlaced with that slightly clingy behavior that comes from when you want something from someone. And people who are responsible for either investing in your company or investing in your writing have a very good sense of when you want something from them, and that puts them off. So when you connect with editors, salespeople, book booksellers, bookshop owners, on a purely like, hey, I love this world. I love being a reader first. That network that you organically build will go a very long way when you have that book out. So start doing that when you just have an idea, and that idea could change, but you're still fully invested in becoming a really good literary citizen. Third, I would start building some form of audience and community. Now, when people think community now, it's almost always, oh, I will have to make reels, or I will have to put out content. So I would say, first of all, stop having that approach toward making content. It's not an activity beneath intellectual pursuits. Making content is one of the hardest things to do. Ask me. I post a reel and I every day ask my husband, why is this not going viral? Why don't I get it? Like some people just get it. So yeah, if you stop trivializing the amount of effort that goes into creating an online community, you will again start appreciating it for the art that it is. Holding people's attention in just 30 seconds is hard. And as an author, you will have to hold somebody's attention in 7 seconds, because in 7 seconds, a reader decides whether they want to buy your book or not. So learn from the masters at this game in what is the attention economy, instead of shitting on it and thinking that it's beneath you. And if you genuinely think you're the kind of person who sucks on camera and can't do it that way, there are lots of other ways. There is still Twitter. There is still building a community by means of first accessing offline spaces and then, getting into online spaces such as newsletters, etc. There's a lot that can be done there. And I'm sure I don't even know half of the platforms that people are building communities, but explore those, because an author can only be successful when they have a bunch of readers who love them.
Okay.
And I think mindset shift is really important here, because earlier people would just read. Like they'll read a Fitzgerald, they'll read a Dickens, they would read one of these really like famous old dudes, but they weren't particularly interested in their lives. And if they were, had no means of like getting in touch with them beyond like letters, right? And most of these men had the privilege to say no to interacting with their fans. For example, like Salinger almost never responded to any fan mail. So you now have the privilege of actually interacting with your readers. And if nothing works for you, go on Reddit. At least contribute to the community there. So community is going to be number one, and you need to start on that train while you write your book and focus on your craft more than anything else. And when you feel down in the dumps, please remember almost all famous authors were rejected multiple times before they became the successes they are today. So rejections are never personal. Nobody is out to get you. Nobody hates you. Either your writing sucks, your idea is too basic, or it's just not the time for your book. So, yeah.
Yes, always keep the fire burning. I think we came to the end of the interview.
Lovely.
For everyone who's watching, please go to the description, find Shreya's Instagram handle and check her out, check what she's up to. And if you are into publishing, if you are into books, she's the best person to go to. So please find her.
Thank you.
So to the people who's watching, see you next time. And to Shreya, we would talk like a few more minutes after the podcast.
Sure. Absolutely. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you so much for being so interested in what I have to say. It means a lot.